good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, whenever you're watching this. This short presentation, which is Monday's class, is going to focus on Chapter 4, the standpoint of Shunyata, and particular Section 5, where he presents his diagram. Okay, as you know, Nishitani is in constant dialogue with multiple philosophers. We've read about this in the previous chapters, and I'm not going to go through all the different ideas and arguments he's presenting to make his own case. I want to approach this notion of emptiness or shunyata more directly and use concrete examples so you can really clarify the so-called essence of Nishitani's philosophy. And the diagram that he shows was actually a good encapsulation of what he's trying to get at. That is, if you understand what the diagram is really trying to represent. Okay, and so we will focus on that for this lecture. And here it is, the diagram on page 141. So you have a center with a capital A, B, and C. Then you have a, a circle, which is he calls sensation, and that would be A1, B1, and C1. I should say that these letters indicate any object that you see. Other people, there's a lamp I have right here, so I'm looking at that. It can be this coffee cup, and I'll use this coffee cup as an example. So capital A, B, and C means the true nature of any object in the world, any entity in the world. Okay. And the next level, if you will, is sensation. And that all that means is that when we see something, here you go, you had a sensation, for instance, of, the color, this color purple, or maybe had a sensation of my hand holding the cup at its handle. Okay. The third aspect, the outer circle, if you will, the field of reason, is called the letters are A2, B2, and C2 because this is one more removed from the reality. So if you look at the whole circle, the center is the true reality of all things, the emptiness of all things. Then we're removed from that, where we are uh, not perceiving things correctly, but this is at the level of sensation. And then reason is the furthest away. Okay. And I'll explain that in the next slide. So let's also look briefly at those lines, T1, T2, and T3. And this merely indicates the fact of time, that when we perceive on the field of reason, things change. Any entity we see in that field goes through change. Now, these lines, T1, T2, and T3, also apply to the field of sensation. So whether we are sensing something immediately, like a color or a shape, when we are on the field of reason, we begin seeing things as entities. Both the field of sensation and reason are pervaded by time. That is, they are pervaded by change. They're all transient. And that's why this is the this is the nature of nihility of all sensations and all things we see through reason. Okay, so let's start with this field of reason, what is furthest away from the center, emptiness. Okay, now reason here does not mean logical analysis, okay, or a structure of argumentation. Reason is actually, the thought process that makes things intelligible. So when I see this mug, I feel that it's an entity, it's a substance, and basically this is a projection, okay? And what that means is that when we see any object, we see it as an entity in itself, well, a whole object, okay? And as I said in my note, one of my notes here, it's really a process of construction or constitution, okay? So in actuality, we don't see things at first as whole entities. We don't see things in and of themselves, okay? what we're doing is moment to moment we have sensations, sensation of color, sensation of shape, right? Sensation of seeing this side of the cup. Okay. But we think we're seeing a whole entity that exists through time because our consciousness is constructed temporally. Uh, and what that means is that whatever object we see, we don't see it just presently. And so right now we just see the side, for instance. We also have a remembrance of this object in the previous moment, in the past. We also have, as you're looking at this, an anticipation that the object will still be there. Okay. So this is based on Edmund Husserl's idea of internal time consciousness. And so basically, moment to moment, we perceive an object, but we also, in our consciousness, we remember the previous moment and we're in anticipation of a future moment that this object will continue. And that thought process creates or constructs our sense that we are seeing things as separate substances. Okay. So let me read my last note on this slide. This is one way of understanding Nishitani's concept of substance, that is, on the field of reason. What we see as a substantial thing, like this coffee mug, is reason's projection of a substance that lies behind the characteristics of the cup. Okay. In other words, we see this, but in our experience, we see it as an entity. There's a substance, and this substance possesses characteristics like color, shape, dimension. Okay. And this is the field of reason. This is our process of constituting substantial entities, which really aren't substantial entities, according to Nishitani. So let me repeat what I just said in a bit more detail. So in any moment, this is the coffee cup I'll be using. In any moment, we see a facade. There we go. Okay. And as I rotate this, in addition to the present perceptions you are having, okay, like you're seeing this facade, and the next moment you see the other side. There is a retention of the past moment of perception and an anticipation of the next future moment of perception. Okay. Now I'm using a visual object, this cup. In class, we listen to a few seconds of music. We can also do that. So when you listen to a piece of music, even 1 second of it, or maybe 5 seconds of it, there's a continuity you think that's there. We don't just hear notes moment to moment. Okay, these notes, if you will, these sounds are pulled together, constituted into a flow. And because our consciousness operates in that way, we understand it as a song. Okay. All right. So let me go back to the slide. This threefold temporal relation of the present, i.e., present hearing, seeing, however you sense something, the past remembrance, the retention, and the future, the projection. This is a function of our consciousness, and this is explained by Edmund Husserl as internal time consciousness. Okay, in other words, as embodied beings, we are actively constituting our experience of the world. This doesn't mean that the world doesn't exist. But what he's trying to say is there is a deep connection between us as embodied perceivers and the world we perceive. Okay. So there is this what they call correlationism, this relation, and our perception isn't merely seeing things as they are. We see things as constituted by consciousness. Okay. So, on the field of reason, what we think we perceive as a thing in itself, the substance of the coffee cup, our coffee mug, is actually constituted by consciousness, by our internal time consciousness. Okay. Now let's go to now A1, this field of sensation. Okay, and that little circle there. Okay. So the previous example of seeing the coffee mug brings us to A1. the field of sensation. Okay. So as I was explaining how consciousness constitutes the world, um, there is something that is okay. Let me say this. So we constitute A2, the furthest away on the field of reason. Okay, we constitute consciously uh, things as substances, as wholes. Okay, but in my demonstration, as I rotated a cup, I talked about the temporal construction. This is now bringing us to the field of sensation, because before we can see a substance of something, according to Husserl, we have to have a sensation of this. And this is what Nishitani is saying too. Okay. So number two on the slide, this field is closer to emptiness because perception in any moment directly perceives, that is, we have a sensation of color, for instance, or shape, a characteristic of the object seen in the facade or that side we see, prior to projecting a substance on the perceived object. Okay. Now, as you look at the diagram, even though they're two different circles, the field of reason and then the field of sensation, moment to moment, as we are, seeing the world, perceiving the world, sensation and reason are actually interconnected. So it's not as if, boom, you know that you're just seeing a facade and there it is, sensation. And then moments later, you project an entity on that. That doesn't work that way according to Nishitani. As we see, both sensation and reason are combined, they are interrelated, all right? And it's this overlap of just having these bare sensations of color or shape, as well as our construction of entities, objects that we see. Uh, this happens in the field of consciousness, okay? So even though we can come to we I can put this, even though we see things as a whole, which is our thought construction based on the direct sensation we have, both of these fields, although they're interconnected, both of these fields happen in the field of consciousness. That there is a profound, deep, habitual sense, a sense that we don't even realize. We almost naturally see things dualistically. We naturally see things as entities on that side, and as we as perceivers on this side. Okay. So now let's go to, hopefully that was understandable. Let's go to the last slide, and this has to do with time. That is impermanence. And then we also talk a little bit about absolute nothingness, the reality of things. Okay. Both A1 and A2 are perceived as an appearance by us and apart from us, or separate from us. All right. So in the field of consciousness, all perceptions are divided into subject and object. Okay. Both A1 and A2 are pervaded by time, and this is the straight lines there, T1, T2, and T3. Okay. So, and as a diagram, he puts it at the bottom there, that one point. But what he's saying is that moment to moment, time, if you can go all around the circle of reason, okay, moment to moment, the constituted objects we see are pervaded by impermanence. Okay. Everything we perceive is impermanent. Okay. And even uh, what reason is based on, that is sensation, that's also pervaded by time. So these bars can apply not only to the field of reason, but also sensation. He just didn't put it in his diagram. And he's now pointing to nihility. That is everything we sense, everything we perceive, everything we constitute changes. That is, there's no ground. Impermanence pervades everything. Okay, we change, we grow old and then eventually we pass away. So we're born, we grow up, grow older, and then we pass away. This coffee cup is not going to last forever. It looks solid right now, but I can break it. Over time, it will degrade. So again, change is a principle that nothing escapes. Okay. Thus, nihility is seen at the ground of the world we perceive as well as ourselves. Now, this is still within the field of consciousness, within duality. Okay. And so, as we live, perceive, and exist in this field of consciousness, this is what we experience. We experience change. If we want to go further in Buddhist context, we experience change. We experience, suffering, uh, and we also really begin to experience the insubstantiality of things. Okay, but what about A, B, and C? Capital A, capital B, and capital C, the very center. Time as T1, T2, and T3 does not apply to that, okay? Because we are no longer perceiving in the field of consciousness. We're no longer perceiving things dualistically, okay? And in some sense, that transcends time. It transcends impermanence, okay? So, point number 4 on the slide, recall the meaning of religion for Nishitani is a self-awareness, and I think he says self-realization, the self-awareness or self-realization of reality in us. Okay, so when he's talking about true reality, it's not an entity outside of us, whether it's a person or an object. True reality is realized as a profoundly personal subjective event. Okay, not personal as in my ego or my separate self, but that the ground of my being is this reality. Okay, an awakening is the comprehension of this reality. And what that means is we see ourselves as well as other entities, capital A, capital P, and capital C, as emptiness itself. We see things in their emptiness. Buddhists also use a positive term, tathata, which means suchness. We see things as they are, okay, in their suchness. Now, Nishitani also, again, as a Buddhist, uh, and of course, within Buddhism, one of the principal teachings is that in emptiness, but form is only emptiness, emptiness is only form. Okay. So, from an awakened point of view, when there's a seeing, true seeing of any entity, like this coffee cup, okay, we see it in its true being, which is paradoxically non being. Okay. We will get into this more on Wednesday. So if it's not totally clear, don't worry about it. I'm going to try to explain it in the next few minutes. Basically, when we see the true nature of anything, we're also seeing the true nature of ourselves. Okay. And Nishitani introduces this idea that to see something in the awakened from the perspective of reality, reality self awakened, all things abide in themselves. Okay. All entities abide in themselves in their emptiness. So when, if you're awakened, I guess, when you see this cup, you no longer see it from the perspective of an observer seeing this entity here. Because remember, when we do that in the field of consciousness, we see a facade, then our minds project an entity or essence to this thing, to this cup. When we see this in its reality, we see its emptiness, and emptiness, how can I put this? It's non-perspectival, right? Now think about that. If awareness is truly non-dual, I'm not saying it is, but from Nishitani's and from the Zen Buddhist standpoint, if true seeing is non-dual, there is no separation, and hence all things present themselves from their own, ground, their own emptiness. And that is a concept that's kind of difficult to wrap your head around. But we will try to make things more clear, this idea of all things abide in themselves ultimately on Wednesday. Okay? So enjoy the rest of the break, and we'll see you on Wednesday.